Hello and welcome to the African Tech Roundup, episode 109. Now, this is where we round up the most important tech, digital, and innovation news from across the African continent. My name is Andile Masugu. Thanks for listening in. I'm rolling heavy today, not because of Musa Kalenga, who we've all come to expect to be on the show, but, so what's up, Musa?
What's up, Africa? I'm back.
That's true, and it's not just Musa and I here today. We have a special guest in the building, a certain Vije. Okay, Vije, you're going to just need to pronounce your surname for me. I don't want to butcher it. You're right here, and it'll be too embarrassing.
Yeah. You just say Vije Vijendranath. So when you say heavy, it's a heavy lifting. The name has quite a few vowels in there.
Vije Vijendranath.
That's right, Vije Vijendranath.
Founder and CEO of a company called TapSnap, as well as one or two other startups that we may or may not get to speaking about today. But welcome, bro.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
A bit of a homecoming for you because you were on the show early on before, I think back when we had 2 listeners.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And that's including you and me.
Yes, and our parents.
You've got 3 now, right?
So, yeah, so it's way more than 2, I guess. So, yeah.
That's good. I mean, at least more than my mother listens to this. That's great.
It's absolutely great. Thank you so much for joining us. And everybody listening to us today, thank you so much for prioritizing this appointment. We love it that you join us each time we come out. And this week, we'll be discussing the fallout that ensued following the publication of an article I wrote. Yes, guilty as charged. I wrote an article for African Independent and Business Report that pretty much went viral. It's probably the first thing that properly went viral that I've ever done. It was an article highlighting the thorny issue of investor bias in Africa's startup funding scene. We definitely need to come into finding out a little more about that. I certainly want to know what your thoughts are, Vijay. Musa and I, we've been talking about this for a while. Gentlemen, we'll definitely be about that business in a while. The other thing we'll be discussing is the trend towards, quote unquote, the Uberisation of everything, which plays into what TapSnap does. And Vijay, I look forward to your insights in that regard.
Someone, was in an elevator and we only had 2 floors to go, right? So I'll have to say it's an Uber for something. But if I had, maybe 6 floors, 7 floors, and we're sitting in Dubai and you're going up the, Burj Khalifa, then I can say, it's the on-demand platform that does, etc., etc. So it's easier to explain. So one hand, yes, it's easy to tell you what it does, but I don't really like the Uberization terms that's being used for startups.
To be fair, I don't like the term Uberization. I do think that it's a great place to start, given that Uber's back in the headlines this week. So we'll get to all that. But first, this episode of the African Tech Roundup is brought to you by GoDaddy. Now, GoDaddy makes registering domain names fast, simple, and most importantly, affordable. They are indeed the world's largest domain registrar. They're trusted by over 13 million customers around the globe, and they provide everything you might need to get your business set up online, including award-winning 24/7 support. Now, to save yourself 30% on a new domain name or to use any of their other services, go to trygodaddy.com/African Tech. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/African Tech to save yourself 30%. And of course, thank you to all of you who have made use of this offer in the past. We definitely do feel the love because every time you do, we enjoy some residual income as a result of that purchase. So go ahead and support a really great business that will give you a lot of value, but also indirectly support us. Right, gentlemen, are you ready?
I am ready.
Ready to roll.
So let's jump into this week's news. Let's start with easily the biggest news this week. And of course, today we'll be speeding through these items because really I just want to take full advantage of having Vijay and Musa here with me to bounce ideas off of. My mind's just been nuts, looking forward to this conversation because, often, just chatting on your own doesn't quite do. So let's get through some of the most important news items that have gone down in the last fortnight, starting with, of course, China and indeed Asia's wealthiest man, Alibaba CEO Jack Ma, visiting East Africa this week. Now, refreshingly, I've gotten no such sort of Mark Zuckerberg vibes from, Jack Ma's visit, because he didn't come here trying to promise sort of we are the world and let's sing Kumbaya and make this world a better place. He came here with 38 billionaires in tow. He's all about the business. Guys, what do you think of this?
I love the fact that he says, I'm going to have this much money and we need to invest in this much time for African startups. I like that.
Yeah, because that's one of the big announcements that came out, partnering with a UN agency to announce basically a $10 million Africa e-commerce focused startup fund that should go live in 2018. Sounding really, really good. Hitting a lot of the right notes. Very little to sort of criticize. I mean, I saw some people kind of, taking umbrage to certain things he said. I mean, he's a hot take machine, this man. But certainly loads of positive vibes on this visit from this guy.
Yeah, positivity I think is great, but I'm always the kind of guy who wants to understand the conditions, right? So that kind of money being spent by a very astute businessman like Jack Ma needs to be analyzed and understood in the long term, right? As we've been saying for the last while. So I think the intention, if you compare his visit, as you meant, to the Zuckerberg visit, was probably a lot more deliberate and commercially driven, and I don't think he made many excuses about that. My caution and my plea is always about investors engaging with men and with businesses of that ilk, that they need to understand that they need to have their story straight. Number one. Number two, when we're transferring value back into the Africa value chain, we need to do so in such a way that's responsible. So I think the hype is great, but I think when the tide goes out, we need to make sure that we've got our dots crossed and our T's. Was it the other way around? Our I's dotted and our T's crossed. But definitely a good show of faith, and I think the Asian persuasion is very, very much interested in Africa. They're investing all over the place. Jack Ma is no exception, and I'm really looking forward to see where that money lands. And as a result, I think it will inform some of the stuff that needs to be done post those transactions.
So, I mean, let's face it, he was in Rwanda and Kenya. Kenya's obviously still enjoying the afterglow of the Obama era. Rwanda is the toast of the town at the moment. Apparently can't put a foot wrong, socially progressive. Yeah, all this sort of commercial innovation that's going on in Rwanda. It's just the place everyone wants to see. It's not just about gorillas anymore. Everyone wants to be in Rwanda. But to your point, Jack Ma's visit appears to be rather meticulously timed. It comes in the wake of the successful deployment of no less than $3.2 billion worth of Chinese foreign aid. I didn't mean that. I mean foreign direct investment.
Yep, Freudian slip, right?
I really did not mean to say foreign aid, genuinely speaking. Foreign direct investment, of course, going towards that very expensive standard gauge railway, which is Kenya's largest infrastructure development project since their independence. And then, of course, only a week or so ago, President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda announcing a $2.9 billion rail project, courtesy of funds or a loan granted by the state-funded China Exim Bank. All of this happening, only a month or so away from the elections. So Jack Ma making sure that he's not arriving in a Kenya that's too hectic from that perspective, ignoring Nigeria altogether, where there's an ailing president who, with dodgy health and, of course, recessionary issues down south in South Africa, what with Gupta Gate and President Jacob Zuma's presidency in all sorts of trouble at the moment, going to what's easily Africa's sweet spot in terms of investment right now. Question is, does it serve us as well as we'd hope?
Well, look, question is, why wasn't Mark in South Africa when he came and did his "We Are the World" speech? So obviously Kenya has a potential future. It's growing well. So is, I think, Ethiopia as well. It's growing really well. They're showing positive attitude to entrepreneurs. It's actually easier to get funding for your business over there than over here. So there's obviously just too much red tape and recession right now in South Africa.
That's true. And I mean, certainly, in Rwanda, you can literally get your business registered in a matter of hours, I believe. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff out there. So not to minimize all the good reasons we should be excited about the region. I believe there was a recent Ernst & Young report saying definitely in terms of investor sentiment, that's the place to be at the moment. That said, the hot take that Jack Ma left me with, I didn't watch everything he said. I did catch some of the more interesting stuff he did say while he was at the University of Nairobi. He, addressing failure, said the following: "You have to get used to failure. If you can't, then how can you win? Gold, man, gold."
Love it. I missed that as well, but I'd love to see that.
Well, staying with East African news, however, it's not so great this time. The Ushahidi scandal is still trending, folks, and unfortunately for good reason. Now, it's really bad when your profile page on Wikipedia reads as follows: Ushahidi Incorporated is a non-profit crisis mapping software company that is in a crisis following a sexual harassment scandal that led to the firing of the company's executive director, Daudi Were. Oh my word, dude, that literally the first lines about Ushahidi when you run a search on Wikipedia. Unfortunately, we're starting to see some Silicon Valley tendencies as far as harassment, certainly in terms of prejudice, things that have been trending in Silicon Valley of late come through to the African continent. We need to nip this in the bud.
I'm not sure if it's a cultural issue, but clearly because startups being so male-dominated, studies have shown, indications have shown, this is why it happens so often. It's just very male-dominated industry, and this is why we need to make a change from the top down.
Absolutely. Angela Kabari, shout out to you. That's the name of the lady who's actually at the heart of this debacle. It's been months since she was allegedly harassed by Mr. Daudi Were, who is in fact an executive director, or was, because he has since been suspended. She put out a diabolical breakdown of blow-by-blow happenings. She posted on Medium in the last week or so, basically saying, I will not be silenced. And just in case we get a spinned version of what happened, this is what happened. And really, it's dreadful stuff. And I'm hoping that it gets resolved sooner rather than later. It implicates, of course, the directorship of Ushahidi, some really big names in East Africa's tech startup scene, not least Eric Hirschman, people who really, I feel, should have treated this issue a lot better, much more proactively, certainly with more efficiency and without victimizing the victim.
Big up to her. Being victimized in this nature, in this industry, is something that we're seeing more and more in media, and I think it's super unfortunate. I was actually having a conversation with some startup founders, some female startup founders in Cape Town a few weeks back. And they were just speaking about it quite honestly in the context of, there's just so much pressure already. I mean, we understand the plight of many women across the continent. We understand the plight of an African woman, let alone that. And to just understand kind of what it means to go through this kind of thing in an environment where you're in a tech space that's meant to be progressive, that's meant to be, having your best interest. And on top of that happening with someone that's in a leadership position. So I think there's a lot that we need to take away from it. I think it's diabolical and unfortunate, as Vije has mentioned. But once again, it's better that we've surfaced it to the light. And I think the actions from Ushahidi need to be quite decisive. I think the statement that they've released so far is a little bit weak for me. But big up to her for calling it out. And Ushahidi, do the right thing. I think that's the important response.
And of course, all the other women who've sort of lived in fear, starting to come to the fore. I'm hoping this is the start of creating an environment where no one ever feels they need to stay in the shadows, particularly when they've been victimized. Certainly, the irony is not lost on the fact that Ushahidi is the Swahili word for testimony, which is, of course, linked to the Swahili word for witness, which is shahidi. No doubt, Angela Kabari and some of the other women coming to the fore, standing as witness and certainly providing testimony to the effect that sexual harassment does not belong in our ecosystem. It must end now. And so to Nigeria next, where a big shout out to the Yaba tech community in Lagos that's currently developing a charter of sorts. They're calling it the Open Yaba Manifesto. It's currently being debated right now. You can check it out at radar.techcabal.com or just Google Open Yaba Manifesto, in your browser and go and see what really is inspiring me at the moment in seeing easily the most prominent sort of tech community in Nigeria. I mean, shout out to you, Abuja, and other places where perhaps you're not getting as much attention as the sort of the tech contingent in Lagos. Shout out to you all, but really shout out to the Yaba community for taking the decision to organize and basically agree on what sort of values they want to see espoused in their ecosystem. So here are a couple of different objectives that they recently identified and have so far established as the main articles of the manifesto. There was something called the Yaba Town Hall, which was convened on the 23rd of June. And since then, there's been very, very lively and passionate debate around what needs to be included, what's important to the community, what definitely needs to be left out, and things like that. that. But some of the main things are culture, what sort of spirit and community do they want to build? What sort of mechanisms should be promoted in terms of funding startups in the Yaba cluster? What about talent? The importance of building it and growing it. Infrastructure. How does the cluster intend to overcome issues of sketchy power supply? What about the traffic issues in Lagos? What about broadband and parking, stuff like that? Then, of course, there's the issue of policy and providing a united front to lobby government and regulators and represent the interests of the community, not just within Nigeria, but on the African continent and abroad. The role of Lagos in the smart city movement that's taking over the world. Research and development, how much time and effort and resources are being poured into this. I love what I'm hearing.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, the notion of organizing at this level is certainly inspiring. I think the only thing from my perspective that is probably a caution is those are big things to be tackling. I mean, those are not small objectives and or areas. I mean, smart cities on its own as an idea, I know it's been coming up quite a bit, even with the PwC recent study, even with the Lions of the Move report. Urbanization is going to be a big thing for Africa in the next decade or two. So my view is always about, can we find one or two things to focus on and drive real impact? Then I see the categorization that's been happening on the site. There's a lot of interest around talent, which I think is a big issue for a lot of tech companies, around figuring out how do we create pipeline, how do we ensure that we're building businesses that challenge the right level of talent that's going to be able to solve some of these problems. Things like smart cities are obviously great to drive a political agenda around helping countries and cities in Africa to urbanize. But once again, I think choosing a battle to fight and fighting it well is probably more important than the big picture. But I think this is going to be an iterative process from what I see. So they've started the process. It's super inspiring. And I hope they can kind of whittle it down to stuff that they can really drive impact and measurement. So
on some level, I kind of disagree with you, Musa, because I do feel that short of the community doing this high-level sort of vision casting, they're basically succumbing to the projection from places like Silicon Valley. In fact, it was quite interesting on Twitter. Recently, I saw one of the community members from Yaba going, listen, we're not Yabacon, we're not Yaba Valley, we're not Yabacon Valley, we are Yaba on our terms, that kind of vibe. I can't remember who you are. Shout out to you, brother. I know you're a brother who said that. But what I take from that is this idea that, is this notion that I fully support, that if you don't plan, someone will plan for you. If you don't strategize, if you don't dream, if you don't assert your sense of values or your ideas for what works for you, other people will set all those things for you. And I feel that, granted, I mean, the nitty-gritties might take a while to set, and certain priorities will certainly float to the surface, etc. I do think it's an important thing for the community in Yaba, specific to this case, to decide, actually, this is who we are, this is who we want to be, and if you want to engage, here are the terms. I love that.
Sure. I mean, I think I completely agree with the sentiment. I'm always kind of I err on the side of action, right? So my question is always to ask, to what end does this achieve actionable stuff? Is this a community that's going to be engaging in stakeholder conversations? Is it a strategic think tank that's going to be setting, as you said, setting course and kind of putting things in place? Or is this an engine that's going to be able to implement and activate, right? So my view is always I err on I always kind of have a bias for action, and then hence my sentiment. So I agree with you in that it is the right thing to do to self-organize. My critique is always to say, to what end should be the question that we always ask, and also we should always hold them accountable to, right? So if they are saying we're coming out as a strategic direction and we're giving a kind of a third hand or the invisible hand that kind of directs and steers, that's great. I think then there's still a conversation around the activation, how that actually translates.
And to their credit, I mean, they're having the discussions. I mean, people asking the very questions, people from within their community going, guys, what this is going to mean? Let's not sort of just plan pies in the sky. Let's be pragmatic. Let's act. And I'm loving the fact that I'm seeing those kind of discussions taking place on Radar.Tech Cabal. Shout out to the sort of stalwarts of the startup movement in Nigeria, the likes of Big Cabal, the likes of Mark Essien and Hotels.ng, really trying to sort of share what they know and also shape the agenda from a practical perspective, because these are guys who've been in the trenches for a long long time, and they're definitely backing this agenda with a very action-oriented sense of urgency. And all the best to you guys. Can't say enough about how excited I am to see this come together. Now, staying with Nigeria, according to a report by the Nigerian Communications Week, the NCC, the Nigerian Communications Commission, has basically invited all the country's telcos to attend a meeting on the 3rd of August to discuss an issue that they're becoming really upset about. In fact, they laid down the law, as it were, saying that by Friday, July 28th, all mobile telcos have to have stopped the ability for people to use call masking, or what's also called call refiling. It's something that's long been considered an illegal thing in South Africa, but in Nigeria, obviously, the NCC wanting to make sure that mobile telcos comply, and presumably calling them on the 3rd of August to tell them what might happen if they don't.
Well, of course, it'll be good to know that if someone calls me and the number it's some sort of communications company, turns out it's a scammer, we got to prevent that problem. I know it's illegal here, but it is still used in South Africa, even though it's still illegal. So sometimes when I call, very often there's a company that provides SIM box solutions. So when you call a company, they will reroute the call through another country because it's cheaper. So you're actually getting a receiving call. Let's say my wife calls me from South Africa. The number is a different number from a different country, because it's being rerouted through there because it's cheaper, and I can't trust it. So that's an issue right there. They definitely need these solutions, like some companies provide, where they can route your original number through it, so you still see the original number even though it's being rerouted. That technology can be implemented.
And definitely Nigeria, with outstanding issues around terrorism and fraud in general. I mean, Nigeria continues to be dogged by the notion that it's a very, corrupt, business environment. Definitely something that I imagine the NCC would want to nip in the bud.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think the reality is that transparency is a key tenet for a modern and a working democracy, and transparency translates itself into lots of different things. But call masking itself, stands against that and flies in the face of being transparent. The downstream effects of that are, the corruption, or the fraud, and the misuse or ill use of communication technology. But let's try and hold those principles high. I mean, I think it's great that we've seen telcos in the last couple of months really taking solid positions on this kind of thing and slapping fines and doing the rest of it. And I say go for it, encourage that kind of thing.
Yep, and they've said that if by Friday the 28th of July, call masking, if call masking hasn't come to an end, telecoms should expect to be slapped with stiff penalties. And we know at this point that the NCC don't play.
Someone just told me when I heard on TV, when I saw it on TV, he said it was a civilizational problem.
Oh my word! Did you just go there?
Yeah.
Like Macron? Are you serious?
That's exactly. If people think that's what they'll think of Africa and all the scam and all this issue. This is where it comes down to.
But yeah, please don't help that man make a point about using that word.
Not him. I'm saying that's the attitude that they have that makes them realize that this is what we are about and this is why it happens.
Yeah, and which is why we need to organize, whether it means our regulation regimens need to be set and rigorously policed, whether it's our communities setting mandates and sticking by them and teaching the world basically how to play with us.
That's why we need to set our own rules. I think as we get into the discussions, I'll elaborate a bit more. But this is why we need to have our own framework of thinking, right? So don't rely on the system that they are making. Let's do our own. Let's build it. And I think you guys will agree. If we make our own rules, we can set our own future.
Well, let's now talk about a company that's well accustomed to setting their own rules and it has really suffered in the last sort of 3 or 4 years as a result. We're talking MTN. Yes, they're back in the headlines again. They've been nabbed ripping data customers off in South Africa. Now, we have mybroadband.com to thank for looking into this quote-unquote disappearing data issue. Now, this issue is something my own wife has actually complained about. I'm like, baby, it can't be, man. Just switch off all your apps or basically join Wi-Fi as often as you can. But no, as it turns out, it's actually a thing. This fact that you buy data from MTN and whether you use it or not, whether you're actually on their network or not, your phone could be sitting on Wi-Fi somewhere, not engaging with their LTE network at all. But they've been systematically charging you for data because of quote unquote it costs data in the background to keep your connection alive or to keep your status with them alive. How ridiculous. MTN, my word.
These guys are thieves, man. The reality is that the problem with data, and I've said this time and time again, is that there is no point in your life where you can get an accurate understanding of how much data you're consuming in real time. Right? So if you try and do that on your phone, or you try and make up the settings, or you try and switch certain things off, at any point there's always going to be inaccurate information relating to how much data you've consumed because of the lag period between the time the telco sends you information and what you've consumed. So number one, that's a problem. Number two, even with these other things that you're going to be switching off your data, trying to get on networks, blah, 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 this notion of data still being consumed because your apps are on is going to mean that you actually cannot control your data consumption. The third thing is that up until now, consumers have been complaining, and I've been one of them. I had huge issues with the other red institution, and I used to go to them on a daily basis, and I used to say, guys, let's sit down and let's recon my data consumption. And time again, they would literally refund me north of 10, 20,000 rand because they went, well, we made a mistake, so here's kind of an in kind or a favor in gesture so that we can just make this go away. And I'm saying that's 10 or 20,000 rand. How often has this been happening? And if I hadn't taken you to task, this would have just slipped past. So I've got big issues with this, but I'm glad that it's been proved now empirically and unequivocally, and I hope they do something about it.
Did MTN say it happens because it happens in the background, or because they don't know how to not bill it?
So here's what happened, right? So what My Broadband and them did, they basically took two different smartphones, tested different SIM cards from all the network providers, right? Put like 12 Rand, 6 Rand, like really small amounts of data on each SIM and left them be, right? Without connecting them to the internet for a short period of time. So of the 12 Rand, say, or arguably 6 Rand, I can't remember the amount, literally, it literally, without being on the network, the amount actually went down. And what MTN is saying is basically there is some sort of data loss because inherent in you being a subscriber to their network, right? That has nothing to do with your phone literally using data as you sort of download content or watch stuff or apps, updating and that. I mean, that's ridiculous. So in other words, they're almost arguing that there's a technical data loss in that process, which I have a hard time believing.
I can't believe it. Surely this is illegal. Surely there's going to be some sort of case and they have to return that money. Will that happen?
It remains to be seen. I hope our regulators listen to the show. If we look how efficiently taken to task companies like Google and Facebook and major tech companies and even like the Microsofts of this world, the attention to detail that regulators seem to apply to their jobs in the Eurozone. We need to start to see that kind of stuff happening here. This has come to the fore not because regulators have investigated it, not because, ICASA has sort of taken these guys to task. It's literally because of some great journalism in this case and really a hashtag Data Must Fall campaign that's made this topical, and that just can't be the way things. We have to take a leaf out of the book of the regulators in Europe. Long before any of us complained about monopolistic tendencies in Google or people in Europe did, they were already investigating it because they could see it wasn't right. We need that sort of dispensation in terms of our regulation, in terms of our regulators on the continent. Well,
I can't believe it. It's even happening right now. I did read somewhere that they said they didn't know how to bill it. Like they didn't know how to keep track of it. That's why it's happening. So it's leaking because they don't have control of it. That's the impression I had, which is actually ridiculous.
Okay, so let's open the mic because this is not a one-sided conversation. We're not an elitist organization. We're not an elitist platform. We're happy to speak to anybody who is part of this community. If you happen to be a higher up at MTN, or if you happen to be embedded in the organization or a spokesperson for that organization, or have a technical know-how or technical information that can enlighten us to the situation as to why it's been happening, if it's still happening, and what might happen as a recourse for all the people who've suffered because it happened, please give us a shout. You know where to find us. On Twitter, we're at African Roundup. On Facebook, we're facebook.com/African Tech Roundup. And of course, drop us an email at hello@africantechroundup.com. Now, moving on, shout out real quick to an e-health startup called HereX, a South African-based startup that has raised over $2.8 million from, various international investors. They'll be using the money to expand their product range. Apparently, their first product was an app that detected hearing loss using real-time environment monitoring tech. The reason we raised this, this achievement in passing is because I think for a lot of our listeners, only so many things buzzing on the continent. There's a lot more to Africa than fintech. There's a lot more to Africa than e-learning, for example, or some of the larger trends that we see developing, large infrastructure trends. There is serious high tech happening on the continent, and it's attracting real money, real investment. So check it out. In case you're listening to the show for the first time and you didn't know, now you know. Moving swiftly along now to a quick shout out. We want to give the Ministry of Education in Botswana, who are apparently in the process of training over 400 teachers to code. Well done to you. Again, this is a great signal, a great trend that we're observing. We complain when we see big companies like the Googles and the IBMs, sell us these, we're going to train 1 million women, we're going to train 1 million people, and we complain that, they're doing it for their own sort of PR purposes. And the truth is, if we don't gear up as a continent for this digital-led future that we're headed for, the truth is it will eat us up. So well done to you, Botswana. What do you guys think?
Absolutely. I think big up to Botswana. They've always been fairly progressive with their approach. And I think the trainer is not nothing new, but I think the content is fantastic. So yeah, big up Botswana.
When we were talking Nigerian news, I forgot to shout out Paystack, a fintech startup that specializes in payments technology. ₦1 billion processed in a single month recently. That's about $3.1 million that they're now handling on a monthly basis. That's pretty impressive considering Paystack hasn't been around that long. Definitely, I'd consider one of the more promising second wave of startups that have come out of Nigeria over the last sort of decade and a half or so. I'd consider, the likes of hotels.ng as part of the first wave. This is now a second wave of like bigger, stronger, more well-resourced, certainly great, fortified with great talent. Paystack certainly doing a great job. And I raise it because you and I, Musa, talked about some weeks ago, that report that said there's like 300-400 odd startups, fintech startups coming up in Africa. It's this big thing. And you and I both sat here and went, how important that really, how many of them are actually, newsworthy? And when it comes down to value, rubber meets road, revenue, traction, how many of them should we actually be excited about? Turns out we definitely should be excited about Paystack.
It wasn't even on our radar, right? So it just tells you that there's probably a lot happening out there, and hopefully we can refine that. I know you've reached out to get that information and to have the conversation so we can expand on that. But as I said before, it's kind of overwhelming to think about 300 fintech startups. But let's keep our eyes on the ones that are doing well. So Paystack, definitely one of the ones to watch.
Yeah, let's be honest. Not all of them can be doing well or worth sort of being excited about. But certainly, as you said, we'll definitely have some people. I won't say who, but we definitely have some guests lined up in the future to sort of help us see the wood from the trees. I think that's how the English say it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Something like that. If I'm wrong, well, sue me. Whatever. Also, news from Nigeria. Microtraction is the latest VC effort to come together in Nigeria. What's unique about them is that they have a specific emphasis towards early stage startups, which we've said a lot on the show. We need to see a lot more VC interest, Africa, homegrown interest or investor interest in the early stage startup landscape on the continent. I don't know. We congratulated them on Twitter this week, and we certainly wish them well. But I don't know if their model of offering $15,000 up front to promising startups and up to $65,000 if the startups show promise, if that's sufficient to sort of guarantee success in an environment like Nigeria, where we certainly know that runways need to run at least into 1 million odd to either get to MVP or some sort of major benchmark beyond seed, that kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm not sure. What do you make of this, Vije? Do you think we should be excited about it, or are we going to see a sort of 88 miles per hour type crash and burn from this sort of approach?
Okay, by strict definition, a VC doesn't work with that kind of amounts, with that kind of percentage of a company. That is generally angel funding, but even then, you can't be taking 6.5% of a company. We're talking 0.5% in the beginning to get you going. Money like that, $15,000, doesn't actually get you out the door at all. The whole point of funding is to help you scale, grow, help you stand out, and really have impact with whatever you're doing. So it needs to be in amounts of $100,000 to $200,000, and then perhaps 6% share of the company. So it's good that it's available, but bad because companies are going to be desperate. They're going to take it. They're going to be working their ass off to get this done, and they're going to actually lose out on future deals because they've already given away too much.
Wow. No, actually, it's $15,000 for 7.5%.
Oh, 7.5. It's even worse. Okay, 7.5%.
Actually worse than you thought. Yeah, I mean, your sentiments gel with the sentiments I heard Mark Essien, founder and CEO of Hotels.ng, express on easily the most enlightening startup conversation I've heard in a long time. Shout out to Doten, who taped it and published it in the last week or so. And Mark Essien was basically telling him why, he's basically tracked the failure of every startup that took less than a certain amount. He cited something like 5,000. These are common sort of prize money type levels, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, typically for as much as 30% of your business. And he reckons that if you're the type of startup founder who's willing to give away as much for as little, chances are you are inherently unfit as a startup founder, and this thing is going to fail.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, it's almost a little bit of an insult because that means you have no clue how to value your own value. And that's typically systemic. And to offer that kind of money, I think is also irresponsible to a certain extent. I mean, the name microtraction implies that they're there to try and support micro business. But then we're making the assumption that micro business are capped at what they can potentially have as upside. So I tend to agree with Mark Essien's sentiment. I don't think there's going to be any kind of, impact developed from that. I think it's like, it's a loan pretty much, unsecured loan for lack of a better word, but it's a loan with conditions that are just completely unrealistic.
It also says that with the $15,000, 7.5 equity stake, you get an extra $50,000 in convertible note, which is a loan. So you're getting a loan of 50 plus 15,000 equity at a $1 million valuation cap. That is actually incorrect. You cannot have a $1 million valuation with a pre-valuation amount of $50,000. Maybe $100,000, maybe $200,000, not $1 million. So they are overinflating their investment with that kind of expectation.
So the desperate are going to go for this, I guess.
Fortunately, and there's plenty of desperate people out there. Just to have the naughty badge, to have received investment, no matter the amount, no matter what you gave up. I think there's a lot of people out there that would go for that. So it's a sad reality, but it's probably going to succeed because of it.
Listen, we certainly wish Yele Bademosi and his team all the best. That said, if you'd like to come on the show and basically perhaps share your rationale for this approach, perhaps there's things about the Nigerian context we're misunderstanding. I can't imagine what we're not getting, but if there is something we're missing and you'd like to school us, if you're involved at Microtraction, or indeed, Yele, if you're listening, give us a shout and let's talk about this thing, bro. We are going to talk a little more about investment later on. We won't segue there just yet, but definitely coming back to this investment issue before we, tap out the show. Our final story for this week, one we certainly couldn't leave out, also because of how it's sort of developed since the last time we spoke about it, the Uber. Uber in South Africa, we shared with you the last time we were on the show that the CCMA, which is basically an arbitration court in South Africa, that, where typically employees drag their employers to when they're seeking reparations for this or that. 7 Uber drivers dragged Uber there some months ago, and that the CCMA ruled that they had every right to, because in their opinion, Uber was their employer, right? And I can't remember if they dragged Uber there for the same reason. I do know that they all shared in common the fact that Uber had taken them off the system unfairly, and they were contesting that. Be that as it may, the big news was that Uber would now be considered an employer within the context of South African law and all the implications that we discussed on the last show, sort of as to what that might do in terms of their business model, et cetera, et cetera. So that's you caught up in case you missed it last time. However, since then, Uber's come out saying, well, listen, firstly, this ruling is specific to the 7 people who dragged us to this court. We've appealed the decision to the Labour Court, which is now where sort of legal precedent would be set if they lost this case, or indeed if this ruling were, set aside. That's where precedent would be set. And so they're saying, listen, one, take note that we're saying that only these 7, this applies to only these 7. So don't you other Uber drivers be judgarach and come here and say we're your employer, number 1. Number 2, we're appealing it. Number 3, we maintain what we've always said, we're not an employer, we're a tech company that helps people, drivers connect with riders and riders connect with drivers. And go. Musa Kalenga.
What bollocks? Look, I mean, let's be realistic here, right? I mean, how can you ring fence 7 people and say this only applies to them? Just on principle, that just doesn't make any sense. Uber's challenges with legislation are so deep and so unfortunate. And I think in a country like South Africa, where, given the history of how people have been taken advantage of because of the background and the political situation, I don't think the courts will rule too much. Will be to be too kind to them. I really think they're going to laugh this out of the court, but I think they're going to rule in favor of the 7 drivers. And once that happens, precedent is set. And once again, we've had the discussion about the fact that Uber's business model is predicated in most cases on breaking the law. And this is one of those instances where you can't have people that are working for you. You're dispensing income through your system, and you assume that you're not going to be an actual employer. So I think it's a load, but I hope that they get taught a bit of a lesson. My question is bigger than that, though, is that will that have a ripple effect in the rest of the organization? Because as you know, recently I think Bozomo St. John has come on as the new leader, and whether this kind of thing will actually feature on their radar as a signal for them to change things, because we know culturally they've got challenges, we know strategically they've got challenges, we know internally they've got lots of issues. So I wonder whether this is a big enough kind of signal for change, or whether it's not. But I don't think they're going to get it right in the courts in South Africa anyway. And I hope that just sends the right red flag to her.
I think their competition around the world, not least Kareem up north in Egypt, operating into the Middle East and stuff, smelling blood in the water, going, hey, this might be our opportunity to take advantage of, what frankly has been large but few weaknesses in this Uber business model, and going, listen, maybe we have the opportunity to sort of capture the confidence and of sort of the sort of monies that have made Uber too big to fail. The sovereign funds, the big venture capital money and that kind of thing. The likes of Kareem going, hey, maybe we could do this better and in a way that won't take everyone off. That said, I'm really conflicted here as someone who pretty much exclusively uses Uber at this point. Uber and Taxify, but mostly Uber, to be fair. The pragmatist in me is going, surely we need to find a way to make this new crowd economy vibe. We need to make it work. We need to figure out how to make it work. It's easily the more efficient way to distribute to channel our resources and make sure that we provide efficient services for everyone, particularly in the transport business. We'll talk about, as a great segue to talking about the quote unquote Uberisation of everything. We can agree on hating that term, but this idea that, this new crowd economy, or this new digital led economy, is giving us the opportunity to play smarter and better than ever before. And surely for that reason, on some level, I'm rooting for Uber to figure this thing out.
There was a discussion, I think, on one of the radio stations where Taxify, Uber, and the transport guy who represented the meter taxis was speaking, and they were saying, well, the customer is king. If the customer wants it this way, this is how we develop it. So how do we then tell the world, or the customer, you and me, if you are happy with the service, why must Uber change? I know fundamentally there are issues with the sexual harassments and whatever labor issues, but fundamentally, if it's an app that helps you connect with a car, why must they do anything else? Because you're the customer who gets what they need, right? Why must they do anything else?
On the flip side of everything Musa feels very strongly on this issue is really quite a simple assertion, and you've just made it, Vije.
Well, I think there's merit in that. My argument is that you as a customer you don't love Uber. You love the utility that it gives you, right? And therefore, Uber as a business has chosen a route to market that, as we've said before, is predicated on breaking the law. The utility can be given to you by Taxify, can be given to you by a number of other avenues. They were first to market, they had the biggest budget.
And to be fair, Taxify on some level also break the law in some contexts.
Sure, but the spirit and the willingness to engage to try and make it right is something that Uber hasn't had at its core. They've employed people in what do they call this, in positions that are supposed to be engaging with government stakeholders, but those employments have been simply to tick boxes and have been not genuine attempts at trying to make things right. And obviously the pivot now to try and make things right is kind of like, have you gone too far to actually make this change? Secondly, to make the change, will that fundamentally break their business? And I don't think it will. And if it doesn't fundamentally break your business, why didn't you do it in the first place? Is probably the bigger question. So I don't dispute the utility, and I'm not going to say Uber's a bad thing. I think the utility divorced from the company and the business and the route they've chosen is what I'm questioning. I think transport is still a big issue we have to solve, and it's not going to go away, and that is why they're successful. But I attack the business and the business approach, the strategy, the morals, the leadership. That's where the problem is. If you had a very different set of leaders that were leading that business that provided such a wonderful utility, you'd have a different outcome. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying coming into markets, especially like South Africa, was a piece of cake, so big up to them for doing it. But doing it wrong and then now claiming that you have to, you have to pivot to make it right because you have to, is kind of like being caught with your pants down, You should have done it right from the first place. And I think because of the size that you had and the money that you had, that's not really an excuse. The excuse is that the culture was wrong and the spirit in which you went to the markets was wrong. So that's my personal view.
Okay, fair enough, and I think I buy into that fully now. But let's talk about this on-demand / sort of marketplace trend as embodied in the context of your business, TapSnap, in a marketplace that allows photographers who often struggle to get enough work to keep them busy, or even the busier ones would say they could be busier, with people who on the other side, say individuals or brands like ourselves or even bigger brands, they struggle with finding on-demand talent when they need it at the best price possible, right? And so tell us how you're sort of riding this quote-unquote Uberisation wave and how you've sort of sidestepped or addressed some of the issues that Musa has brought out as being problematic or inherently problematic if you don't care enough to fix the issues.
First, let me say to Musa, it's like the Uber for photography without the taxi violence. Okay, no, without the taxi violence.
Are you burning the photographers? Sorry,
I mean the photographers not overturning cars because they lost their photo shoots to another photographer.
I love it.
So that's not happening. So that's okay. So the whole point is we're trying to take an existing business model and streamlining it so that it's available online to you. So just like if Meteor taxi drivers were able to put it on their system and say, these are the drivers who are going to come and get you. These are the pricing upfront to take you from your home to Joburg Airport, right? That would be great. That's exactly what's the whole point of it. So if a photographer says that this is what he can do for you, he's going to travel to go here. That's his charge for the hour per hour, and he's going to deliver this. And straight away upfront before you hire him with the price. That actually changes everything because people, and me especially, I have to, I think, call about 10 to 20 photographers specifically for events and another 20 who do weddings and another 30 who can do advertising photography, only to discover many of them are not available or either they're too expensive or they actually don't fall under the specialty you're looking for. So that's essentially what the whole point is to have a real-time streamlined pricing that is fixed so that we can differentiate between a junior photographer and a senior photographer, therefore helping startups hire the ones that they want for what they can afford.
And so what's also different, I think, in your concept, which is quite fundamentally different to, I think, the thinking behind an Uber is, I think Uber, and I could be wrong about this. I wasn't in the room when they were founded, or I can't be in the room, in the mind of Travis Kalanick. I wouldn't want to be in the mind of Travis Kalanick. That said, I think the idea was there is an industry ripe for disruption. Let us go disrupt it. You know what I mean? And I feel, from the moment you first told me about your business to seeing it come to fruition and seeing it actually work in practice and everything, I realized that you exist for them and not at their expense, as it were. You know, when I talk about the people who actually use the platform. So you exist for me as someone who might book a photographer. You exist for the photographer, and you see yourself as a value proposition on both ends. You don't see yourself as sort of this huge disruptive force that's going to steal market share from a lazy industry that hasn't sort of transformed itself sufficiently to keep up with people's needs. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and I love the business, Vije. My question, to play devil's advocate, is let's paint a scenario. One of the photographers that was booked through your system takes a job, arrives at my house. At my house, I've got cameras, and so I can see whatever's going on. He takes a photo shoot, and he happens to steal something off my table, right? I can prove to you that he's stolen something off my table, and I reach out and I say, Vije, your photographer stole something from my table. My question to you is, what's TapSnap's position in that scenario?
Okay, obviously we're a startup and we haven't built that part yet, but here's the important thing. Because we can mediate, we can help you, the disgruntled customer, with this issue, and we can actually negotiate with the photographer. Look, we have this issue, we have evidence, how do you plead? You need to return that stuff, otherwise we're going to ban you off the system, it can no longer work. And we can actually mediate legal proceedings for you, In the future, for example, we're going to have insurance policy to assist photographers and yourself to guard against this, so that, just like Airbnb, if you book your house out and something happens during that time, Airbnb has insurance to recover any losses if a really irate guy rents your place for that time.
Except that's also not such a good example, because they've also come short on that. But I get where you're going with this. But I mean, on some level, you're saying you are owning fully your responsibility in basically bringing the parties together.
At least to mediate, so that when the photographer says, let's take an example that's going to be more common, not maybe the stealing part, but let's say you asked for 30 photographs and I want it delivered tomorrow, and he gave you 20 and it took you 1 week, right? Photographer says, no, I delivered what you asked for. But you say, no, I asked for 30. But we have evidence that you booked for 30 and you asked for 48-hour delivery, right? We can mediate then, and then we can hold on to the money until he gives you all 30. So the money isn't released only once he's fully delivered, and we can prove that. That's why the mediation exists with TapSnap.
So I completely believe that. I think participation in the process and ownership of the resultant consequence is important. My experience, and as I've mentioned before, my wife has got a few Ubers, that she manages. My experience has been that every time there has been an issue, Uber's response has been, it's not us. You need to figure it out. We don't hire drivers. We don't employ people. Therefore, make a plan.
In fact, I've heard recently now they're going to charge you, I believe in the US, I don't know if they're going to roll that out here, charge you $15 to get something back if you forget it in the car or something like that.
Well, there you go. So that as a behavior, as a consequence of them fundamentally saying we actually don't care, right? And I think that's where I have the problem, is that if that is your starting point, and you are breaking the law, and you still have an expectation that this thing will perpetuate, that's where I think there's a disconnect. I think every platform that is the Uber of, has a responsibility, but also has to participate wholly. So to stand back and say we don't have to participate because we don't employ any drivers, I think was an unacceptable standpoint, and that is just one example of kind of the attitude that has come out of the business from my experience.
And so there are two elephants in the room, at least when we come to the, South Africa's, specific to South Africa, the taxi industry here, then they're both black. Okay. The first one, to my mind, maybe there are more elephants, let me know. The first one is the fact that this is one of the last truly black owned industries of note within South Africa. I mean, when I say black owned, I mean, it's no secret. The vast majority of South Africa's economy is owned and controlled by a white minority, and really the taxi industry is on some level a proxy for the last little thing that black people get to own on their terms, right? Okay, so that's one thing, and you could unpack that. We don't have time to get into that. I'm just sharing this to give everyone context, and speaking to your point again, barging into a legacy environment like that and taking no account of what's come before and why things are the way they are doesn't seem to me as a sensible proposition. So that's the first elephant. The second one I see is the elephant of an industry that unfortunately, by and large, is controlled by a very powerful few black people within that industry, right? Whether you look at it from the taxi association bosses or even the taxi bosses. I mean, it's got a trickle-down effect that impacts millions and millions of people, no doubt. But in terms of its control and economic control. And a lot of that control thrives in a chaotic environment where you can't trace every rand. You can't, you know what I mean? The very account that we want to hold Uber to, let's be fair. I don't see no taxi boss trying to help you find your lost umbrella in his taxi or sort of helping you sue his driver because, he rolled over your foot, or do you know what I'm saying? Unfortunately, and not to paint every sort of taxi driver and every taxi owner and every taxi association with the same brush, we have a legacy of that very industry not serving us, we the people, with the respect and dignity and certainly delivering the value it should. And on some level, at least for a middle class, young black person like me, Uber hits such a sweet spot because it addresses on some level the most pertinent discomfort I would experience having to use public transport of any kind. And on some level, that's the uncomfortable terrain. We sort of have to have this discussion about what makes sense. And then, of course, there's the annoying fact that Uber's sitting over in Silicon Valley, making all the money over there. And all of us feel a certain way about that. And most of it's not great.
Well, you must see, Uber, as you said, Uber is a utility, right? It's helping you connect. Uber actually, for some reason, doesn't see themselves as an employer. We are an app.
Well, we know why. I mean, as soon as they did that, I mean, the economics would be horrible and they'd have a lot more admin to think. So we know why. But they don't see themselves, to your point, they don't see themselves as an employer.
Yeah, exactly. So in order to admit that they're not an employer, they have to admit that we cannot help you mediate certain things. We are helping you connect. If they say, yes, we are an employer, then we have to do medical aid, we have to do all these legal proceedings, it'll get too expensive, and Uber cannot exist on that front. That's why they have to admit and accept or tell people, sorry, we cannot help you. We are an app that helps you connect from A to B. What happens in between is between you and the driver.
And with you, I mean, you come into an industry where that expectation doesn't even exist because there's the freelancing within like the photography business has been a thing forever. I mean, you get booked as a freelance artist. I mean, your insurance is your issue. On some level, you're not walking into an industry where a photographer would assume by signing up for to be a part of your service that you are their employee. In fact, quite the opposite. They'd be quite vehemently opposed to any notion that they work for you.
Exactly. It works like a freelance system, except we do fix prices. We say, you belong in this category, therefore this is a price. Do you accept, yes or no? Right? You don't have to accept the price. You will get an email saying, this is the price that we want to charge for this service. Can you take it?
And what do you take off that, by the way?
It's between 6 to 12% depending on the urgency of the shoot, right? So if they say yes, that means they've just accepted the terms and conditions of our shoot and they'll go do it. We don't treat them as an employees because they are freelancers. They are working at their own time. They're working, and we send them a job request. Can you take this? Yes or no? That's what it is.
I see the wheels turning in Musa Kalenga over there. He's trying to work out. I see, and I can almost see the thought bubble above your head going, okay, so Uber over here, snap over here. Yeah, and I see what you're doing, right? And I love this discussion. You know why? Because it's so easy to put Uber on blast, and really why I wanted you to come. And I also know that the whole idea of the Uber this and Uber that is at the heart of a lot of startup founders who listen to us and thinking, hey, that's low hanging fruit. Let me try, let me be the Uber for DJs. Let me be the Uber for this. But there are real deep implications for taking that route that you sort of need to grapple with and be wise to outside of, can you sort of create a great app and can you execute on bringing two parties together in a marketplace, right?
That's essentially it. What would photographers do in the past? We say, okay, let's do exactly what they did, except now they don't have to spend 80% of their time trying to market themselves. We're doing it for them. And then, like an Uber driver, they would wait and someone will pop up and say someone wants to ride with you, and you click accept. It's essentially the same thing. They'll get a notification in the email or phone saying that there's a shoot available in your area. Would you take it? Yes or no? You just say yes or no. That's it.
So we're going to leave it here for now. What we do want to do is open up this discussion to all of our listeners. We want to hear from you. Let us know what you make of this trend towards the Uber this and the Uber that, the Uberisation of almost everything. And we hold the likes of Uber, and rightfully so, to quite lofty standards, because really we can and should. But I think it also speaks to what Yaba and them are doing in their context. Like, what sort of standards should we stand by and espouse and really demand from people who want to engage with our markets, with our technology, and certainly with our money? So give us a shout on Twitter at African Roundup, or give us a shout on Facebook, facebook.com/African Tech Roundup, or indeed send us an email or a voice note using hello@africantechroundup.com. Now, very quickly, gentlemen, we're running quite close to an hour at this point, right? And I almost feel like we should have Vije back to have this other discussion, but I want to seed it at least, and maybe we can have you back at another point and we can sort of check the temperature and have it again. But Vije actually, just to let you guys know, Vije reached out to us a week and a half ago in the wake of an article that I published in African Independent and Business Report. All I did really was outline some of the findings of a report that was put out by Village Capital. So I guess it's worth mentioning that the Bill and Melinda Foundation funded that report. As to why, I don't know. We will have someone from Village Capital on the show pretty soon, so I will ask some of these questions and find out what their motivation was. Nevertheless, this research found that startup funding that went into India and East Africa, fintech-specific funding, pretty much favored companies that were either run by expats or by Africans with sort of Ivy League connections and that kind of thing. A ridiculous percentage of funding went to only 3 or 4 companies over a 2-year period, with 57 odd having to share the balance. And so it just sparked this huge debate on Twitter. I've never had anything I wrote like go viral to that extent, and it was really telling, some of the stuff that came through. So we'll break this whole issue down piecemeal over time. We won't try and do it all right now. What I do want Vije to speak to is some of the thinking that came out of an entrepreneur network, a Pan-African entrepreneur network that he's a part of, and apparently this article landed in the midst of them, and yeah, apparently it got lit. So, Vije, what sort of discussions did you guys have? What's the network you're part of, first of all?
It's called the African Diaspora Network. It's part of Tip Hub. Shout out to the Tip Hub guys if they're listening. Essentially, what they found out was, these were some of them were fintech founders who had good funding, and some of them still trying to get funding in all other industries like food delivery in Chicago, things like that. So it's African diaspora, not just in Africa, right? So this is what we've discovered, that money, the bulk of the money comes out of the United States or Europe. So it's Western owned. So they tend to trust the Western founders that they know of, because the expats have a prior relationships with them for many years. So when they launch their startup and they raise their funds and their rounds, it's much easier for them to get the money. Not because they're the ones with the money, it's because it's easier for them. They have that network. While African-grown startups can't do it because they don't have their prior network. They're starting from scratch.
So on some level, it's an admission that there is bias and a sort of explanation as to why. My answer to that is I don't have to like it. I get you. I totally get you. I get investors prefer to deal with people they like and know and are used to, and people who look like them and feel like them. And I just happen to think that sucks. I don't know if you.
The issue is that's okay. What I'm saying is that's not the bad thing. It's just that don't go investing in just expat-owned companies and then say we are for Africa and we are for this and we are the children and we are the future, and then you go and fund people that you know if they come from your place. That doesn't work. Rather admit it and say this is how we fund.
To tone down what could be sort of boundless idealism, I just have to admit that not everyone is just waking up in the morning trying to be prejudiced and racist, or trying to make sure that only people like them get money and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's a blind spot, and I get it. It still sucks. Yeah. But what else did you discover? And Musa, factor in any time you like at this point. Musa's holding himself back. I think there's like an inner rage I see on his face. But nevertheless, let's get through this, Vije. So that was one important thing. And African founders are all saying these things. On some level, they're like, listen, this is just how it is, right? Yeah. Okay.
Essentially, they're saying is that we need to build our own well someday and start building it ourselves. But that's another issue. Musa is more angry about Uber still, I think. But this is what they're saying. Startup funding goes to hyperscale companies. Venture capitalists have a mandate. We want to build hyperscale companies. We put in $1 million and you grow 10 times in 3 years. African founders build companies that solve African problems. Hyperscale companies usually go global, like your Uber, like your Airbnb. We don't have African companies that have done that because the money that's being given to them you need to solve hepatitis A happening in Malawi. You need to solve the water issue that's happening in Kenya. But if you bring a hyperscale company to them, but that's not really an African problem. We can't. But you said invest in hyperscale. We're giving you a hyperscale idea. Let's make an African version of Airbnb and bring in, ecotourism. No, you know what? We need to put our money into AIDS and all that stuff. So that's the issue. So that's the problem. The sort of funding is going through a catch-22. Hyperscale, but also Africa is not supposed to be hyperscaling. It's supposed to be solving your own problems.
And then one of the points I made in my article, actually the point I was making is that at every level of growth, of startup growth, where finance is required, all the way up to IPO, there are syndicated financial efforts that are made that help everyone involved in these deals sort of spread the risk. And in the case of Uber, we're even seeing a situation where it almost ensures at the high end of that spectrum, like something that's too big to fail, right? And we can never build that if right at the bottom we don't even have an angel scene to speak of, never mind syndication at a national, regional, or continental level. And really that was the point I was making. I was like, guys, I see this happening. I hate it. It sucks. If you're an investor who's currently biased and making decisions on these sort of weird prejudicial bases and stuff like that, well, not only are you missing out on a lot, you suck, you suck, but it's also on us as an ecosystem to see to the growth of a foundational angel scene, syndicate deals that actually create a significant deal flow, and then we can start to attack funding at the various levels, pre-seed, seed, Series A and beyond. But before we do that, I mean, we can complain, we can certainly hold people to account, we can point it out when it happens and that kind of thing. But we can't expect that bias to go away. Certainly, especially when we see angel investors and VC interests here, wait to see what the overseas guys are going to do and then join in the deals. I mean, that's how bad the bias goes, to the point where we're biased towards it as well.
In fact, that's another thing that they came out with, is that the local guys, the African guys who want to fund African businesses, see what the European investment's doing. They see what the Silicon Valley guys are doing, and they put their money there because they don't have the risk capital to risk it on their own. So even the local guys end up putting money into the expat businesses because they want their money to be safe. Because investments work like syndication. When one investor invests in one company, another will invest in the same one. There's no rule that says, okay, you invest in that, I'll go invest in this one. No. If you invest in that, I'll invest in that too, because it needs to syndicate, so it grows in such a way that it's ready for the next stage, which is Series A, Series B, so that you're ready for IPO someday.
And so there is another elephant in the room in this regard, in terms of like the capital that, so the real wealth. We talk, there's like riches, and there's wealth with a capital with a small W, and then there's a wealth with a big W. All right. So in terms of that wealth that's actually African in actual African hands, a lot of that's probably no more than 30, maybe 40 years old at most. And I suppose the risk profile for that kind of wealth, or for those kind of dollars, is totally different to the kind of risk profile or the risk or appetite of those kind of dollars in a place like Europe or elsewhere. And I suppose that's one admission I would make in saying that I don't know if I was sitting on a generational nest egg of $500 million, if I'd be crazy gung-ho about investing in startups to the extent that I should really being in that position should be. So, I don't know. Musa, you've successfully landed some investment for some of your ventures without putting you on the spot or anything. Are any of these things ringing true for you?
They certainly are. I mean, I think on a foundational level, I agree completely with the sentiments expressed. I think, if we just look at the way African entrepreneurs think about problems, I do think they're too local. I do think in them being too local, and I don't think they're thinking about them too locally because anyone told them that. It's because that's where the pain point is, and they're trying to solve that pain point. Now, being able to layer that with the notion of global scalability is something that is not innate to an African entrepreneur, right? So the responsibility from angel networks, past guys who've done great exits, African guys who've been exposed, the responsibility is for them to try and kind of figure out a way to seed that experience, to almost bake it into the next generation of guys. Because I don't think it's fair anymore to say that you don't know. I think, maybe when we were, a couple of years ago, you could have accused someone or said someone didn't know that they can start a business in Africa and sell it in Paris. Now I don't think that's an excuse. But what is not happening is that that's not being passed on and that's not being seeded, number one. Number two, I think then obviously naturally, as Vije has said, it then makes our investment landscape automatically fall into a bucket that is generally undesirable to the guys who've got big money. And that automatically then categorizes us into a particular box. And that's what then kind of is the cycle that we have to break. So all of that on principle, I agree with. And my experience has been exactly that. In fact, I was having a conversation just yesterday with someone that was challenging me around our current business to say, why are you guys thinking so small about this? Why are you guys thinking about this in the context of Africa only? There's problems that you could be solving in Mexico, Argentina, Philippines, Cuba, Peru, that your technology solves. Why? And I didn't actually set out not to think that way, but because I got caught up in doing what needs to be done, my mind went into that space. So the ability for a founder or any tech entrepreneur to be able to have that value to move out and kind of take a helicopter view, have a helicopter view of economics, of markets, that's a luxury, let alone accessing that information that can allow them to make those decisions. So my experience is nothing different to what we've expressed. But my frustration is that that still doesn't make it okay, right? It still doesn't make it something that we should at any point become complacent about. And we need to be very deliberate about ensuring that anybody who's listening to this podcast understands that it's broken and that we need to fix it. Are we actively on a daily basis getting it right? Probably not. But I'm glad that we're actually having the conversation and we're holding certain people accountable. What that means in the value chain is that as we learn, as memory structures grow, as fiber and networks grow, that the guys that come after us will do a better job, and so on and so forth. So solving it all at once is probably not going to be realistic. But I'm certainly kind of struggling through some of those issues on a daily basis. And I'm acutely aware of making those decisions, not only for myself, but those that come after. So that's my experience and that's my view. But we have to start from the conversation.
The other point I made in my article is we need to grow a culture of alternative funding. And I think that's a wide space opportunity for Africa in terms of what that needs to look like, in terms of, I see micro traction in, at least aspirationally, trying to speak to this idea that we need to finance businesses in Africa differently to the way they might be financed in say, Silicon Valley. And where, so at least in spirit, I see what they're trying to do. And I mean, we obviously unpacked why that might, the way they're going about it might not be, quite the way they should, or at least might be unsuccessful in the end. But I was speaking to, obviously, angel investment syndicates as part of that alternative investment scenario. And there's an exciting new crop of, I call them creative financiers. And they're not always African. And I don't necessarily believe they have to be. That's the other thing I think people kind of mistook from my article. I'm not saying let's cut out expats. Let's not do deals with the West. Let's be populist and nationalist or anything like that. That's not the issue. What I'm excited about is vehicles that are allowing us to participate, find traction, build a minimum viable product, survive into, Series A size without sort of having to compromise the values of, you espouse as a startup founder. So tell me a little bit about some of what you're finding, Vije, in this context. You're almost like 3 strikes lucky. I mean, the last 3 startups you founded have us all fairly successful going concerns, and you're certainly looking at trying to tap VC money for TapSnap. Tell me about what you're finding in the sort of alternative finance scene that might be exciting.
Well, the problem is in the alternative investment side of things, they like these keywords that you could have put in there in your investments to make it investable. Got to mention AI somewhere, right? I got to say bot somewhere. I've got to say it's fintech somewhere.
You have to say pot. Marijuana.
No, bot.
Oh, bot.
Well, pot might help, but bot is what they want. They want these keywords. It's always these trendy, just like any health fads that happens right now. They'll invest in that. The problem is they don't look at the problem of the startup solving something that's going on in the country or in the world. They know that this is the trend right now. Let's invest in it. I think there was an article done by one of these companies. startups have mentioned AI like 800% increase or something in the last 2 years because saying it gets your attention of VCs.
So if your pitch deck doesn't have AI or bots in it, hey, dude, you're not getting that money.
I mean, if I bring out an AI system that can intelligently give you the right driver to come pick you up from Uber, that's going to do well. You want a bold driver, right? Who, for example, cleans himself and is very punctual. AI will identify it based on the breath mints that he eats. He'll come right at you and pick you up. That's the kind of stupid AI stuff that people are doing that gets attention of VCs, and that would be the creative thing I'm talking about. You got to actually put those keywords in there somewhere to somehow get them to look at you.
So that aside, though, and your point's actually well taken. In fact, we were talking, before the show started about is it Juicero? This diabolical failure that Silicon Valley's reeling from, and just again bias at play there. No doubt, the right type of individual in terms of profile, probably a whole bunch of Ivy Leagues, of a certain race group, of a certain gender, with a pitch deck with the right keywords in it, with the right network to get the first sort of several million bucks that signal to everyone else that more bucks should come, to create a pretty nonsensical product that no one needs. On the flip side, there's Vije with a fairly, clever, perhaps on some level, relatively simpler product and platform that does deserve the cash in order to grow at least the chance to prove that it should exist or not, but can't even get like a decent deal or an angel investor to back, or either through an angel syndicate or through a VC. That must be frustrating.
Yeah, it's quite frustrating because the problem is, like I said, they're looking for the keywords in the emails. If it doesn't really fall in, they just ignore it. So
they probably have AI running like searches through your emails.
They probably have AI looking at keywords and searches like it must say this and must say that. Okay, then go with it. Someone must say he is a Stanford grad. Okay, let's look at that. Look at Juicero. Juicero, I think is one Ivy League, like you said, Ivy League guy. He pushed the right buttons and he built a product that went through a specific health fad, which is pressed juice, which is going on right now. Everyone wants pressed juice. So he rode on that and he built something, over $120 million funding to build an MVP product. That's R1 billion. He got more money.
That's 120 pre-seed.
That's pre-seed, yes. Because that's more money than the entire value of Takealot.
That's more money than flowed into East Africa's fintech scene in over the last 2 years.
Exactly, one company in a 1 month session of funding.
Okay, so there was that. There's a Canadian firm or an Irish firm that's actually doing interesting things that you were telling me about earlier.
There is a firm called Lucy Fund that actually open to African startups, especially South Africa. Is what they do a 2/3, 1/3 model. So if it costs $100,000 on a technical perspective, because they help you specifically with technical and some marketing. So if your app that needs to be developed is going to cost $100,000, right? They will put in $70,000. You need to put in $30,000. If you can put it up, they will develop the app for you. And then they will take a 6% stake in the company and you get a pre-valuation or post-valuation of about $600,000 to $700,000. And that's a nice model because they have done quite a few projects already. And it's helped a few companies who have battled to raise. Because if you have a model like this, you can actually syndicate easier. Because now that you have a funding organization helping you with resources, you can actually get additional funds from a VC who says, you've got this and this, I can put in something, and then your post valuation is even higher.
I like to be solutions oriented. My articles are only like 1,200 words odd, so I mean, can't stuff everything in there. But the reason I think this was so important to talk about is because we like to highlight issues. We like to hold, responsible parties to account. We want to own parts of the issues we ought to own in order to push our own ecosystem forward. We don't want to sort of put the burden of action and improvement on other people when we should be doing the stuff. At the same time, we need solutions that we can try. Heck, we've said a lot about microtraction and why we feel like that model might not work. Here's one that, could very well be applied by a local VC outfit. There's a crowdfunding VC effort about to be launched in South Africa. We'll definitely hear more about that in the coming weeks. I think this is the time Africa needs to take to experiment. We know what's broken. We're getting more and more attuned to what's broken and how it needs to be fixed. Let's put our heads together at whatever level, whether it's at a community level, like Yaba is showing us to do, at an angel investment level that ABAN is spearheading, whether it's venture capital interests like Microtraction and others, foreign venture capital interests like Lucy, or even bigger funds, at a startup founding level, people like us need to put our heads together to figure out how we can sustainably move forward for the good of this entire ecosystem. The last time we had a chat this long, we had a Kenyan in the building. We have a South African who is arguably one of the more connected Africans in South Africa, I think, within the startup ecosystem. Why is it that South African startup founders don't connect as readily to the Pan-African system, just out of interest, do you think?
I don't know. If you ask a South African, they don't believe they're African. Haven't you seen that? So we also behave a bit like Silicon Valley, where we think we are our own country when you don't really belong in the African continent. I'm doing air quotes right now. So that's why they're not networking as readily as possible.
And I think travel. I don't think South Africans travel naturally. It's never been something that I've ever experienced with young South Africans. Actually, it's starting to change, but traditionally they're not the kind of people that will travel Africa, let alone, well, maybe Europe, but less so in the Africa context. So maybe that's why a combination of those two things.
Zimbabweans, on the other hand, try and stop us from getting in your country. Try. Like,
I love it.
Like, I don't know, embargoes, sanctions, like, don't give us, we'll get there. We'll get there. But listen, guys, thank you so much. I'm just going to, one last time, thank GoDaddy for sponsoring this episode of the African Tech Roundup. Remember that you too can buy your own domain name, build your site, or use any of GoDaddy's business tools and save yourself 30% by going to trygodaddy.com/African Tech. Thank you. One last time, I want to thank Musa Kalenga. Seriously, as far as co-hosts go, it's such a blast. I look forward to recording these shows every single time because I know you'll be there. So thanks again. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Andile, and thank you guys. Always a pleasure.
And then, of course, Vijendranath. Vijendranath.
That's correct. Yeah, it's nice to be here, and I had a lovely chat.
Yeah, dude, just keep doing what you're doing. We'll be checking the sky for all the startups that you're involved in. Congratulations with this particular one. Show the way, lead the way in terms of the Uber of this and the Uber that. Show us how it ought to be done. Of course, Vijay's business one last time is TapSnap with a double P at the end, .co. Check it out. And again, we'd love to know what you think about how this whole trend towards on-demand marketplaces, what it might need to start to look like for Africa to fully take hold of it and benefit from it fully. I believe that Vije is one of the better examples of what that can look like. But let us know what you think, okay? So yeah, otherwise, I'm the last one on the mic as per usual, and it's my job to say thank you once again for listening to us. My name is Andile Masugu. Until next time, Africa, do take care.